It is my pleasure to welcome you to Northern Kentucky History Hour. I am your host for tonight, Mary Jane Calderon, joining you from my home in Fort Wright, Kentucky. Also joining me by Zoom is our presenter for this evening, Sarah Jordan, and my assistant for this evening, BCM Service Associate Heather Cook. Thank you all for being here. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's museum, that would not be possible without support. Thank you to all of our sponsors, including the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and our members. If you are not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining for access to discounts and exclusive programming. Learn more and join at bcmuseum.org. Now, a reminder before we get started. We love participation from our viewers, so please leave any questions or comments you have in the chat or the Q&A feature, and I will be sure to get to those at the end of the presentation. Now it is trivia time. Tonight's question is, who made white wedding dresses popular? Go ahead and type your answers in the chat, and we will announce the winner at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. Sarah, I turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen here. All right, so while my presentation is loading, like Mary Jane said, my name is Sarah Jordan, and I am a collections associate here at the Behringer-Crawford Museum, as well as a student at Northern Kentucky University in the Public History Master's Program. So I have been working on the fashion and furniture exhibit Treasures from the Attic for months now, both from my perspective and my role as a collections associate and as my role as a student at NKU. So tonight I am going to be presenting on 250 years of fashion. And again, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and Mary Jane and Heather will let me know about those at the end. And I think that's it. I hope everyone enjoys the presentation, and please forgive me if I make any mistakes. So 250 years of fashion. So the question we're going to be talking about tonight is, what can clothing tell us about the past? So everyone wears clothes. Everyone has always worn clothes. And clothing can tell us quite a bit about various elements of people's lives and tell us a lot about the past. I mean, just think about what the clothes you are wearing today can tell someone in the future about you and about your personality, your identity, your life, your lifestyle, all of those things. So clothing can be a very important tool for examining the past, and we're going to talk about how we do that and what it can tell us about the past and about people in the past tonight. So one thing that it tells us is how people lived in the past. There are various elements to this, with undergarments, societal roles and responsibilities, class differences, access to materials, ways of making clothes, reuse and maintenance of clothes as well. So one thing that tells us a lot about the past is undergarments. We still wear undergarments today, and one of the things that undergarments really helps to do is to protect our outer clothes from the body oils, sweat, all of those things that are generated by your skin. So most people in the past would wear some kind of first layer of undergarment. For women, it was often a chemise or a shift, which is kind of just a plain dress, might have decorative details on it, but it's just a plain dress that'll go under all of your other layers of clothes. Men often wore just like a white button-up shirt or something, or some kind of shirt underneath all of their other layers of clothes. And those serve the purpose of protecting your outer layers of clothes, providing a little bit of support, You also can prevent your outer clothes from rubbing and causing friction on your inner clothes in an on your skin in an uncomfortable way, because a linen chemise is generally going to feel pretty nice against your skin. Um, you also have corsets and stays, which are very similar. Stays are earlier. Stays are something that was common before the 19th century, the 1800s. So throughout the um, 1700s and into the early 1800s, you have stays, which are a boned support garment. They tend to be a little bit less tight and structured than corsets, but the idea of stays and corsets are both to provide structure and support. So whereas today women wear bras to support um, their breasts. In the past, women wore corsets and stays to do the same thing. Corsets and stays also support your back, your shoulders, and help carry some of the weight of all of your layers of clothes that'll go on top of that. So looking at this stuff, we can learn a lot about um, how people lived, what their daily lives looked like, because it's always interesting to know what is happening under their outer layers of clothes, in my opinion. Something else that clothes can tell us about the past is social roles and responsibilities. So this is a collage that I made of people fulfilling different social roles and responsibilities. You have a scullery maid in the 18th century who is going to be wearing more utilitarian everyday clothes. She is going to have something that can get dirty, that is more something that you can work in easily versus a fancy rich woman's dress. You're also going to have aprons and all of those kind of things for working dress. Um, you also have women in their roles as wives and mothers. In the 1800s, in the Victorian period, you especially have the idea of the angel of the home, or the woman being this homemaker, this housewife who is making her home a safe place for her family and to raise them up to be good citizens. So, women in their role as mothers and wives, clothing plays a part in that because you have to have clothes that match your level of society and the social expectations being placed on you. And women who have had children and who are older are going to dress differently than women who are unmarried and looking for a husband. You also have farmers and your laborers who, again, are going to be wearing more utilitarian clothes, stuff that can be worked in, can be more durable, because they're doing those heavy labor, they're doing that work. And then you also have your noblemen, so your nobility, the people who are your lawmakers, your um, authority figures, and they also are dressing in ways that reflect their social roles and responsibilities, at least how they perceive it to be, because they're going to dress up nicer, they're going to make sure they look nice, all of that kind of thing. Clothes also highlight class difference between people. So on the right of the screen is a ball gown from the 1870s, and that represents a upper class woman, and she has enough money for a gown of silk. She has enough money for a gown with all of those details on it. She has enough money for a gown that has that much fabric at the back for bustling. And she has enough money to go to a ball. Everyone had dances, but there's a major difference between a society upper class ball and a lower class village or town having a dance. Um, and on the left, you have a workhouse. Now, workhouses were something that in the 1800s in particular were created to provide somewhere for impoverished people to go and have a job and have food and have resources. Although it was often an abusive system where it was causing harm, even though it was supposed to mitigate that harm. But when you're in a workhouse, you're not wearing something like this fancy, nice ball gown. You're wearing more everyday utilitarian working clothes. Another thing that clothes can tell us about the past is access to materials. So, access to materials majorly influences what people wear, what garments look like, all of those kind of things. So, and people of different social classes have different materials available to them financially and things. So, on the far left here, this yellow piece of fabric is wool damask. And wool was something that a lot of people would have had access to. You can make wool garments that are more fancy and upper class, or you can make them to be that utilitarian, simple stuff that your lower class, your laborers would want. Um, Wool is more of a winter textile because it really helps keep people warm. So you're going to have a lot of wool garments that are have, you know, capes and all of that kind of thing because wool is good for keeping people warm. Um, Excuse me. You also have linen. Now, linen is a very common textile to be used across social classes. Um, Linen is often used as your undergarment. So your chemises, your shifts would have been made of linen because linen was such an easy garment to have a textile to have a lot of. And you can make it nicer for outerwear, you can make it simpler for your undergarments, all of that kind of thing. Um, and linen would have been affordable to more people. So people could buy linen textiles to make their clothes out of because it was easily accessible to people at that point in time. You also have silk, and silk is more of a upper class textile in a lot of ways because for a very long time, silk was something that had to be imported, and that made it really expensive. So it was a status symbol to have something made of silk. And if you had silk, you were fancy and rich. And so upper class people would have had garments made of silk, both men and women. But lower class people were far less likely to have anything made of silk. And if they did, it would have been like one item, but probably nothing made of silk because it wasn't in their budget. Um, and you also have cotton. So cotton is something that before the invention of the cotton gin in the late 1700s, you have cotton material, but it's more expensive. But after the cotton gin and American slavery really makes it to where cotton is a lot easier to produce and to make bigger quantities of, then cotton fabrics become a lot more common across social classes. Um, Something that is worth talking about briefly here is that all of these pieces have patterns, and people in the past really liked having colors and patterns on their materials. Um, Now there's variation in what kind of patterns you would want to have, and I'll talk about that a little bit more towards the end of the presentation. But even lower class people would have had at least some garments with patterns because it wasn't necessarily something that made textiles infinitely more expensive. Sometimes it did, depending on the type of pattern or whatever, but not always. Another thing is that cotton in the 1700s, cotton was imported from India a lot of the time, and you have printed cotton that was imported from India. And so in Great Britain and France, there was actually at various points bans on importing cotton material from India because the French and the British wanted to encourage their homegrown textile industries over importing the cotton from India that everyone really wanted. People still did it, but it was being discouraged. Another thing that tells us a lot about the past is ways of making clothes changes a lot. So in for most of history, you have to hand make all of your clothes. You have a needle and you have thread and you have your material, and that's what you get. And to make any materials, you have to hand do it all. You have to hand spin, you have to hand weave, all of those kind of things. With the industrial revolution, textile manufacturing became a lot easier. So you have water mills and all of these kind of things, the Flying Jenny, um, all of these machines that make producing textiles a lot easier. And that makes textiles cheaper for more people and makes things more accessible. All of those things are kind of influencing each other. Additionally, you have the invention of the sewing machine. On the screen here is a sewing machine from the middle of the 19th century and a modern sewing machine. So you can see some of the similarities and differences, but sewing machines in particular really helped revolutionize how we make clothes because it makes it so much easier if you can have a machine do some of the work versus having to do it all on your own. There were still difficulties, it still took a lot of work, but it was easier with a sewing machine than it was having to do everything by hand. Another thing that clothes tell us about the past is how do we reuse and maintain our clothes? So one way we maintain our clothes is by washing our clothes. Now, with laundry and with washing clothes, a lot of the times people don't wash their whole, like wash their outer dresses, their outer garments as frequently because all of those undergarments, those chemises, the corsets, your drawers, your petticoats, those are the things that are going to be collecting your sweat, your dirt, your dust from your skin, all of your oils, all of those kind of things that really make things stink and make things dirty. And so all of those are going on to your undergarments. So those you're likely to wash every week, every other week more often. And you likely only wear it for a day or two before switching it out. Whereas your outer garment, your outer dress, you've protected that. You've protected it from the dirt and grime and things. So that doesn't actually need to be washed as often. And that protects those outer clothes for longer. It makes it so that those last longer. Additionally, when you are going to wash an outer piece of clothing, hand washing can be a lot more gentle than machine washing. Machine washing, you put everything in the machine and it goes around in the circle cycle and all of those kind of things. Whereas hand washing, you can be a lot more gentle with things that you need to be more gentle with. Additionally, a lot of people in the past reused their clothes. So this dress here is from the 1820s, and there is evidence to suggest that this piece was a reused dress from the 18th century. So it had been made in a way that would work for the 18th century styles, and then someone along the way took that pattern, took the material, and was able to remake it to fit the style of the 1820s. And you see that a lot. You see that a lot with people remaking older clothes into newer styles. You see that a lot with people using older clothes and taking them in or bringing them out to fit a new body, to fit your changing body, all of those kind of things. And then when clothing just can't be reworn anymore, it can't be reused in that way of remaking it with the same material, that's when you use it for things like rags and it becomes your rag doll, it becomes your rags that you clean with, those kind of things. Also, something that people do with dresses is they pass them down to servants. So if they are no longer the thing that you as the rich woman of the house is going to wear, you can give it to your servant and they'll use it. So that also kind of plays a part in how we it influences what survives is part of the piece of this is the stuff that survives from museums tends to be smaller, more fancy, more particular because the stuff that was getting worn every day, that was being remade, that was worn by the average everyday people every day of their lives doesn't survive because it gets reused until it can't anymore. Um, because again, when you can just resew it together to be a different dress, and then you can do that until the fabric just is falling apart and you can't do that anymore. And then you're using it for rags, like there's less time for it to be preserved in the way that would be required for it to be in museums. So another thing that clothing can tell us about the past is morals and standards of propriety. With that, you have length of skirts, long sleeves versus short sleeves, necklines, and conformity versus rebellion. So, length of skirts is something that absolutely is relating to the morals and ideas of propriety of different time periods. So, this dress on the left here is from the 1920s, and this dress on the right here is from the 1910s. So, within the span of maximum 10 years, you have the hemlines getting shorter. You have dresses with their hems up at the knees instead of at the feet or the ankles. And this is because with the 1920s, you have the flapper dress, you have that kind of push towards women's independence, and the raising hemlines is a symbol of that. But you see this at other times in the past too, where 1830s has shorter hemlines than shorter skirts than the 1840s, even though both are still pretty well full length and pretty well down to the floor. There's a slight difference there, and with that, you can also see the difference between those decades with their morals and their standards of propriety. So length of skirts is an interesting indication of those differences between times and between the way people view how people should dress and what proper is. Because in the 1920s, while yes, the flapper is still a little bit of a rebellious figure, absolutely, dresses as a whole were shortening. Whereas 10 years before, they were almost to the ground. And while dresses drop after the 1920s back down a little bit, they never go all the way back to the floor. Not for standard everyday wear. Another thing that we can see with morals and propriety for the past with clothes is long sleeves versus short sleeves. Now, long sleeves in garments generally means it was day wear. And short sleeves generally means that it's evening wear. Having long sleeves that, depending on the time period, go full length all the way down to your wrist or anywhere down below the elbow is generally a sign of being proper during the day. But for evening wear, for your big fancy parties and balls and all of that kind of thing, your dinners, it's appropriate to have shorter sleeves that are not covering up your whole arm. Um, and part of that is because of the difference between how people viewed, your evening wear, you're getting fancier, getting up, dressed up nice, and you are a little bit more free with evening wear to have less coverage. You don't have to be as morally upstanding in your clothing as you do during the day. So that is super interesting to consider. And when you look at garments, you can pretty easily tell pre 1900 or so, whether it's a daytime garment or a nighttime garment or an evening garment, because if it doesn't have sleeves, it's probably an evening garment, because really you don't have sleeveless dresses being a thing until later that are not evening wear. Another thing that goes along with that is necklines. Periods throughout history have varied a lot with whether you wanted a high neckline that covers you almost all the way up to your neck, or you want a low cut neckline that doesn't cover a whole lot of your chest, or anywhere in between. So the dress on the left here is a replica robe à la française. And as you can see, it has a much lower neckline. At that point in time, you don't have the same uh, push for modesty when it comes to where your neckline falls. Obviously, still fully covered in every other respect, but necklines, it was okay if those were lower at that time period. Whereas the dress on the right is a replica 1860s dress, and that neckline is a lot higher. It is not low cut, it is not revealing anything in that dress. And again, that is a representation of the ideas of modesty and morality and propriety of those times, because by the 1860s, you've had a shift towards more modest dress where you want to be more fully covered in your chest area. It is also worth noting that necklines also vary when it comes to evening wear versus day wear. For evening wear, it was more acceptable to have lower cut necklines to show more skin, all of that kind of thing. Whereas day wear, you're more likely to have a fully buttoned up, fully covered chest area. Something else that we can talk about when talking about kind of morality and propriety is how do people conform to standards of dress of the time versus how do they rebel against that? How do they push against that? And there's a lot of stories to go along with that. For one, you have these ladies here who are in jumpsuits, like they're in full overalls, and they are factory girls in the early 1900s and around 1920 or so. And for women of that period who were working in factories, overalls and those kind of more utilitarian wear just makes a lot more sense than wearing a nice dress and heels to go work in a factory. It's just more practical. So a lot of women do that, but it also becomes a bit of a social stance, a symbol to be like, I'm a woman and I am not doing the proper thing and wearing a dress. I'm wearing overalls. So people started doing that outside of factory work and things like that as well. You see a spike of women in pants with World War I and then World War II. And then in between those two, you definitely have a growing acceptance of pants for women, but it really doesn't come until after that that you really get it to be more fully accepted to where now women wear pants all the time. This is on the right here is a pantsuit from 1970s. And this is interesting because it goes along with that conversation of what should women be wearing. In the 1970s, a pantsuit for a woman was kind of a power move. It was something that showed that, hey, I can be professional, I can be in the workplace. 1970s are also a time where you have a growing shift of women in the workforce, in the workplace, and not just being stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home wives anymore. So pantsuits kind of go along with that. Women are trying to match the idea of professionalism that will allow them to have power and to be respected within their jobs. The picture in the middle is of 1960s dresses. Now, this is up here because through a lot of this time period that we're talking about, there is still absolutely an idea that to be proper, to be the utmost proper, a woman should be wearing a dress. That is the best way that she can be formal, that she can be fancy, that she can be proper. And I always remember one of my aunts telling me a story about when she was in going to college, when she was in high school, in those years of her life, girls going to school had to wear dresses. They were required to wear dresses. Their dress code was for dresses, and you could get in trouble for wearing pants. And that is such a foreign concept to us today because everyone wears pants to school nowadays. Half of the people in high schools are wearing leggings, and all of the people in college are like wearing leggings or sweatpants or whatever else, and there is none of that like gendered girls have to wear dresses to be fancy enough, to be formal enough, to be respected. But in the past, that was absolutely the case, even as recent as the 1960s and 70s. So all of these things kind of go along with the idea of women and people in general choosing to conform to the standards of the time versus pushing back against those and using clothes as a means of change and encouraging forward growth in that way. So we can also talk about what are the defining influences of the period. This tends to be things like the royalty, nobility, and political figures, actors, singers, cultural movements, all of those kind of things. So for royalty, nobility, and political figures, these people tend to have quite a lot of influence. Nowadays, we see this with first ladies in American history, people like Jackie Kennedy, um, Eleanor Roosevelt. These are all women who have, as first ladies, played a big role in fashion and clothing and all of these kind of things. But you also see that historically with royalty and nobility when considering who is making fashion trends happen, who is influencing those. The answer is often royalty or nobility or political figures, the more recent you go. So on the left here, we have Marie Antoinette, who was the Queen of France in the late 18th century. And in this portrait by um, Elizabeth Louise Vigée Lebrun, um, who is a really notable female artist at the court of Marie Antoinette and her husband. But in this portrait, Marie Antoinette is wearing a chemise dress. Now, this type of chemise is different than the undergarment chemise, but it's essentially a simple, plain white, loose-fitting dress that was often tied with some kind of sash at the middle, at the waist. And it kind of is your precursor to um, the Regency style empire waist simple dresses. But Marie Antoinette is the person who is credited with popularizing the chemise dress for daily wear and not just your chill at home kind of thing. So Marie Antoinette is the person who absolutely drives that trend forward. On the right is a portrait of Queen Victoria. And Queen Victoria was someone who in her long reign from the 1830s all the way to 1901, she played a massive role in a lot of things to do with fashion and culture, including wedding gowns and mourning clothes and uh, the general modesty of clothes in that time period. All is thanks to her. So we'll talk some more about some of those later, but royalty, nobility, political figures, all of those people play really big roles in influencing fashion of the periods that they exist in. Other people who play major roles in influencing fashion and trends are your actors, your singers, and your celebrities. So on the right here is this beautiful lady. Her name is Jenny Lind, and she was a Swedish opera singer called the Swedish Nightingale, who was really, really famous, really well known, and she was brought over to America by P.T. Barnum, she had not wanted to come over to America, and so Barnum had asked her to, and she said, "I'll only do it if you pay me enough." And she gave him a sum that was like some crazy high amount. When he asked her, "How much would I have to pay you for you to come over?" She gave him a crazy high amount, thinking he wouldn't do it, and then he did it. So she came over to America. And when she did that, she massively influenced culture and styles of that time period because she was so well known and she was so famous. So lots of things were named after her. She was a major figure influencing people in the middle of the 19th century. More recently, you have people like James Dean, who was a male fashion icon of the 1950s, middle of the 20th century. You have people like Audrey Hepburn, who also major actress, fashion icon of the 20th century. Um, these people are encouraging people or showing people what they should wear, and what they're wearing is often the things that trickles down to other people and is what those people are going to end up wearing as well. You also have Miss America influencing trends and what people are wearing because, if a beauty pageant queen winner, if the Miss America is wearing something, that's something that you also might want to go with and wear as well and reflect those styles. Like this dress here is from BB Shop in she won Miss America in 1948. Um, and you can see obviously this dress is well beyond what anyone is going to be wearing for an average day or life or anything like that. But the silhouette of it being kind of a wider skirt is something that people adopt in the 1950s to a much lesser extent, but it's still there. You also have cultural movements playing a big part in influencing fashions of the time. So on the far left here, we have a 1830s dress with the big guilloche or leg of mutton sleeves. Um, and this dress, this period is something that is called the Romantic period. The Romantic period, the Romantic movement or style, is something that really harkened back to the past, pulled a lot of influence from history, particularly like early 18th century, 16th century time frame. They're pulling a lot of influence from them and trying to recreate this romanticized, idealized version of the past. And that is something that is involved, influences everything from um, literature, poems, art, and all the way to fashion. You see that with this definitely a dramatic look to it as well. People were highly influenced by romantic heroines. So, like whatever Walter Scott was writing in his plays, you're gonna try to imagine what that woman is dressed like and try to copy that dress style because it's romantic. It's all fancy and fun, and that's what you want to copy. This dress in the middle is from the 1840s, and it is part of the Gothic style or the Gothic movement of that time period. Now, the Gothic style and Romantic style are similar, but very different in some ways. The Romantic style looks more broadly to a romanticized past kind of in general, whereas the Gothic style, the Gothic movement, really focuses in on medieval styles, medieval churches, and castles and art and all of those things. So if you've ever looked at like a medieval Gothic cathedral, you're going to see a surprising amount of similarities when you compare that to furniture and fashion of the Gothic period in the middle of the 19th century as well. So this dress represents the Gothic style, the Gothic period, by having a more dramatic look. It is a lot simpler, but you have sharper angles. You have a more defined V. Your bodice is going down to a V shape on the bottom. You have less dramatic sleeves, but you have more of a triangular shape. Whereas your previous dresses are maybe more domed, this is more triangle. You also have higher necklines. Your bodices, it all looks more modest and more conservative, and that is both because of Queen Victoria's influence on increasing modesty in dress, but also because of that Gothic idea of you got to look demure, you got to look formal, you got to look fancy at all times. A good way to describe it is kind of modest or demure. People are trying to look that certain way. Um, and on the far right here is a Regency style dress. Now, the Regency period is from about 1800 to 1820. And during this period, there is a heavy influence from neoclassicism, which is a return to bringing back ancient Roman and Greek ideals and styles as a whole. So again, that is something that you see across different things with art and literature and architecture and fashion and furniture, and all of those things reflect that style. But dress in that time frame really reflects that neoclassical ideal by being very loose, free-flowing, unstructured, similar to how people imagine Roman togas and things like that were. You have a lot less structure than previous pieces, and then that comes after as well. So you also have certain traditions that we can look at and learn about through the clothes that are associated with them, including mourning and your wedding attire. So these are examples of mourning dresses and ensembles. So this one on the far left here is from the 1850s. This middle one is from the 1890s and is actually Queen Victoria's mourning dress from 1894. And this on the far right here is from the 1870s and is a full mourning ensemble. Now, mourning in the Victorian period was kind of a trend in a lot of ways, where mourning, it was always a thing. You always had a mourning procedure, but the Victorians kind of took that to the next level, where they were doing it for longer and in more specific and regulated ways. A lot of the times when you think about Victorian mourning customs, you also think about things like hair wreaths and weirder elements of Victorian mourning. But these are ways in which clothing represented mourning, which was that you would have like full mourning for like a year, depending on your relationship to the deceased. It could be more or less than that. But for about a year, you would be in full mourning. You would have to wear all black all the time. And you might even have like this ensemble on the right here, a whole veil that you're having to wear with it, varying levels of all of that kind of thing. But you've got full mourning, which is like all black for like a year or so. And then you go into half mourning, in which you can introduce lighter colors. You can introduce some whites, grays, lilacs, different things like that, that are a little bit more bringing color into things, but still a lot of darkness, a lot of black, a lot of reflecting that you're in mourning. And then after that, you can come out of mourning. Half mourning usually is about 6 months, although it kind of depends on the individual, because like I said, Queen Victoria here, this is her mourning dress from one of her mourning gowns from 1894. And Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, passed away in the 1850s. So she remained in mourning for her whole life after his passing, all the way until she died in 1901. Most people did not do that, but because Queen Victoria did that, mourning really became a lot more of an intricate procedure, an intricate tradition than it necessarily had been before. Wedding attire is something that Queen Victoria also was a massive influence in. Now, people have always worn white for weddings before and after Queen Victoria, but before Queen Victoria, it was a lot less common. Queen Victoria really popularized the white wedding dress when she got married to Prince Albert in 1837, I believe. Um, and she wore a white dress for her wedding to him. And because she was the queen, because of who she was, her wearing a white wedding dress meant that everyone else afterwards really wanted to also wear a white wedding dress, which is where we get that tradition from even today. So this is a variety of white wedding dresses, including from the 1860s with this one on the far left. This one with the big sleeves is from the 1890s, which again, you see that bringing back of the previous guijot or leg of mutton sleeves. This dress here in the middle, the second to the right, is from the 1830s, again with those larger sleeves. And then this last dress is from the 1880s, I believe, and represents that even as today we do not all wear white wedding dresses, people in the past, even after Queen Victoria really popularized the idea of a white wedding dress, people still didn't necessarily always wear a white wedding dress. People chose sometimes to wear color because they just didn't want to wear a white wedding dress, or because wearing a colored dress for your wedding meant that you could reuse it for more things. Although not every white dress is a wedding dress, because people wore white dresses at other times too. The final thing that A final thing that clothing can really tell us about the past is aesthetics. So what patterns, colors, materials people liked, dimensions, shapes and silhouettes, and standards of beauty. So patterns, colors, and materials is something that we've touched on a little bit throughout this presentation at this point. But absolutely, these things tell you a lot about the past. There are a lot of vibrant colors, like this 1814 dress in bright yellow. There's also a lot of intricate patterns, like this dress on the far left is from the 1750s and has the silk pattern is made to look like lace. And you have all of that kind of thing. You also have this one on the far right here that's a much more simple, just a white dress. But if you look closely at it, you can see some of the decorative details in the dress itself. So patterns, materials, and colors all kind of come and go in and out of fashion. Things like stripes, florals, dots, bright colors, those all stick around pretty consistently, but there are ways in which you can look at a particular pattern, material, color, and be like, that's more likely to be 1840s because the 1840s had this particular kind of stripe pattern, whereas the 1860s had this kind of stripe pattern, or didn't have a stripe pattern at all that they really was in common use. Didn't mean that people weren't doing those things that were less popular at the time, but they did it less often. So all of these things are really interesting to kind of look at because it can tell you a lot about the time period in which these things were being used and being made, as well as the lives of people who were wearing them, because everyone has personal preference when it comes to things like patterns and colors. I mean, some people like me want to wear yellow clothes, yellow shirts, whereas other people are like, absolutely, I'll never wear yellow. And that was true in the past as well. Also, something that we can talk about with what does clothing tell us about the past is dimensions, by which I mean the skirt size of the dress. Also, you can look at the sleeve size of dresses and bodices. Now, this one here on the left is an 1750s court dress with panniers under it. Panniers under it. I don't know how to pronounce that word. And you can see just how long and wide that is. The 18th century generally had a trend for just having width of your skirt, like straight out, to where it would just be kind of like horizontal in a straight line. Um, Whereas in other time periods, you get your dimensions and your shape in other ways. So in the 1860s, you get your shape through hoops. So instead of having a big lengthwise skirt, in the 1860s, you have a big skirt when it comes to like your width. You have a skirt that is supported by hoops to make it as big of a circle as possible. And in other time periods, you have a bustle, which will build dimension and length in the back a little bit more. And at other times, you have very little dimension or shape at all, and it's more narrow and straight down, or just a very small kind of shape to it. You also have shapes and silhouettes as part of this. And as you can see here, you have just a wide variety of silhouettes and shapes that are in at any given time. Now, this is supported by your sleeves, your skirts, whether or not you have hoops, you have bustles, you have whatever else. And this here is a great example of just a wide array of those kind of different silhouettes and shapes that you get. Everywhere from a Regency dress, which is more straight up and down, a loose silhouette, less structured, all the way to a 1870s dress, which focuses on expanding in the back and having a bustle. And your 1890s dresses like this pink one, which has large sleeves, take up a lot of space, quite impressive. And everywhere in between. You can learn a lot about the styles and the trends of the time by looking at these things. And it is also interesting to consider how do they achieve those silhouettes, because it isn't necessarily natural, but it isn't necessarily done in the way we think it is. When we tend to imagine these kind of like dramatically small waists, we imagine that people are just like sucking in their corsets as much as they can, whereas that is not necessarily as often the case as we think it might be. One of the things that these silhouettes can really do without having to have like a dramatically pulled in corset is create an illusion of your silhouette of a shape. When you have large sleeves, like in this 1890s dress, your waist is automatically going to look smaller, regardless of how much smaller it actually is. Additionally, when you have a large bustle in the back, your waist is going to look smaller because your attention is not focused there. When you have a hoop, a bigger skirt, the same thing is true. So all of those things kind of contribute to this illusion that your waist is smaller, and that is also helped by like your placement of your bodice, how things are kind of arranged on your bodice. Like, do you have a bow here? That's going to make things look different than not having a bow on the front of your dress. Additionally, things like your undergarments, like your corsets and all of that kind of thing, help smooth out your clothes and support you enough that you're not going to have loose fat or whatever kind of hanging out in weird places. It just provides a little bit of shaping and support that'll help smooth out your outer garment and create that illusion and that look that you want. Finally, we can talk about the standards of beauty of the time, and I'm only going to touch on this briefly, but standards of beauty are also something that change a lot over time and that can tell us a lot about the past. Nowadays, we have certain ideas of what is fashionable and what is beautiful that this robe à la française just doesn't match up. Nowadays, we look at this and we are like, why is it so wide? Why is the skirt so straight across? But in the past, that was what was beautiful. That was what was trendy. That was what was cool to have. That's what all the cool and pretty people were wearing. Similarly, you have people and organizations like Miss America influencing what is considered beautiful. And you see that with shifts in Miss America dresses and beauty pageants and all of those kind of things, all the way from this 1948 BB shop dress to this 2001 red Heather French Henry Miss America dress. and everywhere in between. Like there is a vast difference between those two things because fashion standards, standards of beauty, what is beautiful, what is fashionable, changes a lot over time. All right. That is my presentation.
Wonderful.
So,
Great job, Sarah. I
questions?
know we're getting close to, we got about 5 minutes and I know we've got some questions. Before we do that though, since you're still sharing your screen, is there any way that you can show us many of these pieces are in the exhibit, Treasures from the Attic? Can you show some of those? Especially, I think those last couple slides really showed some of them that we have at the museum. Can you
Yeah,
mention
so
those? That'd
all
be
of these dresses are currently on display at the museum as part of the Treasures from the Attic exhibit. All of these dresses are also currently on display as part of our Treasures from the Attic exhibit. This one in the middle is on display. I also pulled a lot from these both are on display. I also pulled a lot from the internet because we do have gaps in our collection to where we don't have representations of every single style and period. And also trying to take pictures of clothes inside of cases is it gets a little bit of a glare. So
Yes, I struggle with that many times.
yeah.
But I also want you to touch on how did this exhibit come to be? I mean, this was a partnership with NKU, right? So with your class. So can you talk a
Yes.
little bit about that?
Yeah, so this exhibit is something that we've been working on for about half a year now. And it kind of started as an idea of, oh, maybe for America 250, it would be fun to do a fashion exhibit. And then we also threw in the idea of maybe it would be fun to do a furniture exhibit. And this fall at NKU, there was a class in decorative arts. And so that class was able to do a lot of research and work into preparing the exhibit from the furniture side of things, while me and other people were working on the fashion side of things. So through that class, we were able to research different furniture styles, kind of figure out what we would want to do with the exhibit, as well as acquire pieces. And we have several of these pieces are from the museum's collection, whereas others are on loan from private collectors for both clothes and fashion, or fashion and furniture.
Thank you, Sarah. And we did have one you kind of skipped past that was a pantsuit, and I wanted to mention that that does have a little bit of history with our executive director, correct?
Yes, this pantsuit on the right here is was made by our executive director, Lori Reich, for her mother.
Great job, Lori. Okay, Heather, we had a winner for the trivia question. Do you want to repeat that trivia question and then announce our winner?
Yeah, so that question again was who first made white wedding dresses popular? The winner for that is Queen Victoria, and our winner is Donna Bresser. So congrats, Donna.
Congratulations, Donna. And I know that was a tough one because we did have a close answer right behind that one on
We
Facebook. So
did.
good job. Congratulations, Donna. Okay. We did have a question, I believe. Is that correct, Heather?
Yeah, so when did clothing consignment in thrift stores start?
That is actually a more complicated question than you might think. The answer, what we would currently think of as consignment or thrift stores, really started in the 20th century. So it's a more recent thing. However, people have always have for a very long time have utilized secondhand clothes. They just didn't necessarily go to a thrift store for it. So in the past, you would get secondhand clothes maybe through um if you were a servant, you would get a hand-me-down from your boss. You might have secondhand clothes from family members, from friends, something like that. But thrift stores in and of themselves, I believe, are more of a 20th century thing. Although there are probably um, earlier examples of secondhand clothing stores as even in the 19th century.
All right, thank you. We did have an interesting comment too about the pants. Did you want to read that one, Heather, from Patty?
Um, She said when she first started at the post office, her boss, who had started working in the 60s, had to wear dresses and pants were not allowed for women.
Yeah, that's a common story for sure, and it's absolutely crazy to think about today where it's like, oh, I wear pants every day and wearing a dress is a rare occasion. To think that all of 60 years ago, it was the opposite was true, and that wearing dresses was your expected daily thing, where it isn't anymore.
Okay, Sarah, you also mentioned the Miss America dress that you showed on the screen. Can you also mention some of the other ties in the exhibit that we have with Miss America and the tie with Heather French Henry?
Yeah, so in the exhibit we have, I think it's like 9 Miss America dresses or related pieces of clothing on display, all the way from BB Shop's 1840 or 1948 Miss America coronation gown, which is the very large gown with a lot of flowers and things on the front. We also have Susan Powell's dress from 18 or 1981. I'm getting confused on dates. Um, We have her dress from 1981. We have Evelyn A from 1954. We have Vonda K. Van Dyke, who won in 1964, I want to say. I could be wrong on that. Um, and we also have a couple of dresses from Heather French Henry, who is Miss America in 2000. And we also have a Star Trek costume from Lee Merriweather, who was in one episode in 1968. And we have her costume, and she won Miss America in 1955.
Very cool. Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned that one. It's a very cool costume. And if people don't know, Lee Merriweather was Catwoman in the Batman movie or Batman series. So, and we also have a trophy as well with the Miss America too. So it's a pretty cool
Yes.
little, uh, it's a very nice highlight with Miss America in fashion. Well, I mean, thank you so much, Sarah. You did a great job. It was a wonderful presentation. I think that's all the questions we have, correct, Heather?
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. That's all we have time for this evening. Thank you again to all the sponsors and supporters of BCM. Until next time, take care, everyone, and good night.